A CBSN Originals documentary, originally released last year, explored the intricate world of gender beyond simply him or her. It's called Gender, the Space Between, and it looks at how gender is being redefined. Here's a look at some of that.
A general frustration has been not being able to get identity documents that correctly recognize my gender. And just sort of feeling like I'm committing perjury, whichever marker I put down, where I'm like, both of these are wrong. New York State driver's license, US passports, none of those recognize non-binary genders. And also like updating the Social Security office, which people use for background checks for employees. Those all only allow binary markers. That's frustrating, and also creates a worry where like, if an employer is using like an automated background check system, if there's a discrepancy or a mismatch in any of those places, that can get flagged as like, this person may be committing identity fraud.
The producer of Gender, the Space Between, Christina Capatides, joins me now. So Christina, you spoke to trans folks who do not see themselves as either male or female. Explain their journey and the specific challenges they're facing.
Right, so first let me just explain that, in 2018, I think a lot of us assume that we understand what it means to be transgender. We watch Transparent, we know Caitlyn Jenner, we watch that journey, but actually there's a whole community of transgender people that don't, fall into the binary transgender definition. So cisgender people like you and I, which means that we identify with the gender we were assigned at birth. So you're a male, I'm a female. We tend to understand what it means to be transgender in that sort of binary lens. So you can either go from male to female or from female to male. But what you should think about is male and female as ends of a binary spectrum. And while some transgender people do go from one end to another, there's also a large community of people that identify as non-binary, which means that they live somewhere in the space between that, which is the name of our doc, Gender, the Space Between. And like any spectrum, there's an infinite amount of possibilities along that spectrum. Some people identify off of the spectrum altogether. One of our characters is agender, which means that they reject gender completely. They consider themselves neither a male nor a female.
And it's a spectrum that much of society and much of the American bureaucracy does not recognize.
Right.
And you've explored some of the challenges that presents.
Right. One of our characters, Bryn, who I believe you just saw, discusses the struggle with identity documents in America. So, you go to get a driver's license and they make you choose between male and female. All of our driver's licenses have an M or an F. And what Bryn says is that it feels like you're committing perjury, whatever option you choose. Certain states in the U.S. are changing that. Oregon, California, Maine, New York, they're putting a third option, an X, on driver's licenses to try to account for that.
And as someone who has just a small name issue, I have a hyphen in my name, and I still can't even buy a plane ticket on many airlines. So it's not just the government, it's also every business, every credit card, anyone you want to do a transaction with.
Every time you apply for a job and they do a background check, if there's any sort of confusion between the gender you told them and the one that's on your identity document, it can flag that. And what Bryn told us is that, if there's a flag in your background check and there's 100 other applicants for that job, they're not going to stop and think, oh, maybe that person's non-binary, you're just probably not going to get the job.
There are legal issues. Obviously, there are emotional, personal issues involved in all this. In the doc, you explore this idea of the dead name. What's that?
Yes, a lot of transgender people, when they transition, they change their name, and the name that they were given at birth is then referred to as their dead name. And there's a sort of uncomfortable moment in the doc, but I think it's really important, in which I ask Bryn, who's a graduate student at NYU, can you tell us the name you were given? And Bryn very abruptly says, no. If I had one wish from a genie, it would be that any reference to that name would be wiped off the earth.
This whole concept is so new to so many people. How do we parse out what part of this is just a new discussion and what part of it is a new phenomenon?
Right. I think a lot of people think that, and what's important is that it's not new, but the vocabulary may be to many. We have one expert in the doc whose name is S.J. Miller, who at the time that we spoke to S.J. was at NYU. Now S.J. is at University of Wisconsin-Madison. But S.J. described coming out as, you know, a non-binary trans person later in life, and basically said that when SJ was in, and I should preface this by saying SJ does not use any pronouns at all, not he, she, not they, them, just the name SJ, so that's what I'll be doing.
Yeah.
When SJ was in college, SJ thought that perhaps SJ was a lesbian. That didn't feel right, and then, but all of the other people that they were friends, that SJ was friends with, you know, were going through similar things, and later in life, when they all discovered the non-binary vocabulary, they realized, oh, that's actually what we are.
Yeah. Christina, thanks so much for your time, and keep up the good work in Originals Land.
Thanks.
And Christina's dot got a shout out from none other than Lady Gaga Monday with this tweet with a link to the president. After the New York Times story broke, Lady Gaga wrote, quote, "Man, woman, and transgender are just the beginning." You too can watch the CBSN Originals documentary, Gender, the Space Between, anytime you like on your streaming device, the CBS News app, or at good old CBSnews.com.